Welcome back to Their Future Our Pod. I'm your host, Annie Andrews. Their Future Our Pod is an Arena production. Arena is South Carolina's only progressive media company. If you have not already, please subscribe at arenasc.substack.com. Later on this episode, I'm going to be joined by Sam Schwartz. Sam is an incredible young man who is doing admirable work to ensure that we are able to build the future every child in this country deserves. Sam is a member of Gen Z, and we're going to talk a lot about Gen Z's role in activism and what those of us who are not young enough to claim to be Gen Z can do to mitigate the damage that has been done to help Gen Z in their efforts to get this country on the right track. I'm so happy that Sam is joining us. But first, I want to dive a little bit more into this whole conversation about Gen Z activism, because when I am talking to people about Their Future, Our Vote, and Their Future PAC, which is our nation's first and only political action committee for kids, one of the first questions I get is, well, how are youth involved in your movement? And how is Gen Z involved in your movement? Now, Gen Z are, college students right now, so they're not exactly youth. But I think it's a really important question because I am not a member of Gen Z. I am awkwardly sandwiched between being an elder millennial and being a member of Gen X. I am not a member of Gen Z, but I have 3 young children who are all Gen Alpha. I feel inspired every day by the activism and political engagement that I see from Gen Z activists. But I also feel a sense of shame, embarrassment, and motivation to mitigate the harm that has been caused by members of my generation and generations that came before me through a lack of political engagement. If we're talking about my involvement in my 20s, a lack of political engagement, apathy, or voting for our own personal best interests, not thinking about the bigger picture. So we have saddled our younger generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, with multiple unprecedented crises, right? We've saddled them with the crisis of climate change. We've saddled them with a mental health crisis. How do they navigate social media, gun violence epidemic? Really, the list goes on and on and on. Rising cost of living. And what is so inspiring about Gen Z and what I anticipate will be so inspiring about Gen Alpha is they are not sitting on the sidelines complaining about what we have done and what the problems we have contributed to creating for them. They're just not waiting. They're getting off the sidelines. And we saw this after the horrific shooting in Parkland, Florida with March for Our Lives. We see this on the issue of climate change. And as a mom and a pediatrician, I am just so inspired by the youth of this country. But again, I feel a sense of deep responsibility and also shame that they have to face all of these problems. People who were born in the late 1990s or the early 2000s don't know a world in which there is not political unrest. They don't know an America where things aren't so hyper-partisan, hyper-political, and political violence becomes something people casually refer to on social media. And yes, we can all sit back and be inspired by people like Sam and other Gen Z activists, or we can look around, dig deep, and figure out what we can do to help mitigate this harm. And one of the reasons we should do that and not just saddle Gen Z with all of these problems is we, as late 30s, early 40s, 50-year-old folks, we have access to financial resources. We have access to networks, professional networks. We have tools that we can use to help contribute to the change that Gen Z is trying to create, that we should have been a part of creating for so long. So I could stay on my soapbox about this forever, but I appreciate when people ask me this question, how are we working with Gen Z? A perfect example of this is the Tour to Save Democracy that Sam and I are going to talk about. Their Future, Our Vote is so proud to support their efforts in trying to get out the vote in key swing districts this summer so that we can take back the House, that we can elect a kids first majority, that we can elect a Democratic majority that is serious about acting on issues like climate change, gun violence, reproductive freedom, and everything in between. So I also often get asked, Annie, do you feel hopeful? And my initial gut response to that question is always yes. I have no choice but to feel hopeful because I have 3 small children. My children are 12, 9, and 7. I brought them into this world. I have to feel a sense of hope for what their future can be. The other 2 reasons that I feel hopeful is because of the conversations I have with women like me who have children or don't have children, but who have been on the political sidelines for so long, but now feel it's necessary to engage, whether that's because of attacks on our reproductive freedom or because of the issue of gun violence, active shooter drills in our children's schools. I feel hopeful because of the engagement that I see amongst women. But the number one reason I feel hopeful is because of Gen Z. So what we see from them is inspiring. I've said that many times already, but it truly is. They are not waiting for their turn. They are not just complaining on social media. They're getting out there, they're learning how the system works, and they're doing the work. And if I think back to what I was doing when I was a college student, I'm not even going to go there because it is nothing compared to what Sam and his friends and colleagues are planning this summer and the work that they get up every day and do. It's incredibly inspiring. And speaking of Gen Z, not just waiting their turn, we have our first member of Congress from Gen Z currently serving. Maxwell Frost was elected in 2022 in Florida 10. Of course, he's up for re-election. He has been an incredible lawmaker, incredibly inspiring. And, he was born in 1997. I will not tell you where I was in life in 1997, but he wasted no time. He was a leader in March for Our Lives. He ran for Congress, and he is creating real change. And I know he's inspiring other members of Gen Z to take it to the next level. I often tell people, especially pediatricians, that they just need to find a way to dial it up. And I see that that's what's happening amongst Gen Z. They're seeing their friends get involved, whether it's on social media or at rallies, showing up at state houses or showing up in Washington, D.C., and it's infectious. The more folks who get involved, the more people who will get off the sidelines, because we need to see people like us engaging, and we need to understand that there's no reason to wait our turn. So I did a little bit of digging preparing for this conversation with Sam, and I found a United Way survey about Gen Z activism because subjectively, I see it everywhere. I see it all over social media. I see it all over the news. It is incredibly inspiring. I see it here in South Carolina on campaign trails, mine and others. But I wanted to find some data, right, to support that. So what I found is that 32% of Gen Z members who were surveyed in this United Way survey regularly engaged in activism versus 24% for millennials. So 32% regularly engage in activism. If you look just at Gen Z college students, 40% of them regularly engage in activism. Now that is something. Like I said, when I was in college, I was selfish. I was worried about what the plans were Friday and Saturday night. I was worried about my classes, getting into medical school. I did not see the world beyond my little world. And, of course, looking back, I regret that, but damn, I'm so inspired by these young people. 33% of Gen Z members in this survey have reached out to a politician about an issue at least once. Like I was saying before, when I talk to pediatricians, pediatric trainees, other moms who are getting involved in gun violence prevention, one of the practical tools I teach them is how to contact their lawmakers. And I see a hesitancy, not everyone, but, they're nervous to make that phone call. They don't know if it'll make a difference. But here we have 33% of our young people have reached out to a politician about an issue at least once in the past year. So if they can do it, I think we can do it. 61% surveyed volunteer at least once a year. 27% donate to a cause or a candidate. 27%, 1 in 4, over 1 in 4 members of Gen Z donate to a cause or candidate. If they can open up their wallets and donate, then we have no excuse. Again, we as millennials and members of Gen X, we have access to things that Gen Z doesn't have access to. And we have to put our money where our mouth is, or in this case, just do everything we can to support these efforts because they're willing to do the hard work and we need to show up with them. 66% of this activism and engagement happens online. And I think that's a big difference, of course, of what the world was like when I was in high school and college versus what it's like now. And obviously, there are huge pros and cons to being able to engage in these activities online, but it is inspiring to see what happens every day and the power of building online networks to effectively address the issues that sometimes it feels impossible to break through on. What is Gen Z concerned about? They're concerned about inflation and cost of living, healthcare access and affordability, affordable housing, climate change, gun violence prevention, income inequality, racial equity, LGBTQ rights, and education access. And what I love about these data is that this is perfectly in line, of course, with what our mission at Their Future, Our Vote and Their Future PAC is, because we all care about the same issues. And I joke sometimes that Their Future, Our Vote's platform could just be called Sensible Things, because it truly is. Young people want to be able to afford to live in the communities in which they work. They want to be able to afford healthcare and not worry about going broke if they need an emergency appendectomy or, God forbid, have a diagnosis of a serious medical condition like cancer. That's not a lot to ask. They're worried about climate change, of course, because the folks who are in the pockets of big oil and gas are not going to be on this planet for that much longer. But people who are in their teens and their early 20s are, and they need to have a sense of security about the climate that they are inheriting. Obviously, gun violence prevention. I never did an active shooter drill when I was in school. I did tornado drills. I was in the Midwest. We have saddled this generation with the psychological trauma of not feeling safe in their classrooms. And far too many of them have been directly exposed to gun violence, but every single one of them have experienced an active shooter drill. And that's on us. That's a policy failure. That's a lack of political engagement on an issue that is deeply important to our nation's youth. So we owe it to them to get involved for that reason. And as I said, I have 3 kids who were born 2012 or later, so they're all members of Gen Alpha. But what I see from them is also inspiring. Now, my sample is a little biased because they watch me run for Congress. But my 12-year-old is very tuned into what's going on in the world. And she subscribes to a wonderful publication called The Week Junior, which is directed towards, I would say, middle school students and maybe a little bit younger, depending on your child's maturity level. But I highly recommend The Week Junior because it breaks down political issues, pop culture issues. It's really an incredible source of information for our young people and can help them get a taste of what it's like to see the world outside of their little myopic view of the world. And they published a survey right around the time I think we were launching Their Future, Our Vote. And I just loved it because it was really in line with exactly the priorities that we designed as an organization. So in this survey of very young people, of young students, 86% said they wish adults would listen more to kids. When giving the option of picking up to 3 issues they wanted elected officials to pay the most attention to, again, this is Gen Alpha, 38% picked managing inflation, 35% chose protecting people from gun violence, 33% selected solving food insecurity, 31% said protecting the environment, and 29% said ensuring equal access to good education. So whether it's parents like me who care, whether it's Gen Alpha, whether it's Gen Z, we're all thinking about the same things. And the problem is we don't have enough elected officials who are willing to prioritize these issues, because these are not the issues that line the pocketbooks of our nation's politicians. And we got to flip that around. They were also asked, these Gen Alpha members, the first thing they would do if they were elected to public office in their community or their state, and 27%, they would make sure that all residents had food, shelter, clothing, and basic needs met. Meanwhile, our Supreme Court just decided that homelessness is a crime. 15%, they would want to do something to decrease gun violence. What a shame that is that our children are thinking about this, but of course they are. Another 15%, they would offer assistance to schools so that all students could receive a quality education. 82% hope to inspire other young people to make positive change in the world. 72% believe their actions can make a difference. That's incredible rates of self-efficacy in our young people. 77% said they are not afraid to express their opinion if they disagree with something. And that might be my favorite piece of all. So there are so many reasons to be hopeful. Sam is going to be a reason that you are going to be filled with hope today after you listen to my conversation with him. Gen Alpha is another reason, but those of us who are millennials, elder millennials, Gen X, we've got to do our part. Again, we have access to things that these young people do not have access to. We have bank accounts. We need to get involved. We have no excuses. How shameful is it that our young people are out there marching on the streets and some of us are still sitting on our couches? So please listen to my conversation with Sam. Figure out what you can do to dial up your involvement in advocacy, activism, politics in the 4 months leading to our, the most important election of all of our lifetimes. And just be inspired by Sam, follow along with what they're doing at Tour to Save Democracy. And thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Welcome back to Their Future, our pod with Annie Andrews. I'm here today with Sam Schwartz. Sam is the founder and executive director of the Tour to Save Democracy. He's also a rising junior at the New England Conservatory. Thank you so much for joining me, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Well, so I just want to dive right in, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience a little bit and tell us how you got involved, what your background is, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So my name is Sam. I got involved with politics after the Parkland shooting. My cousin Alex was one of the 17 victims killed in that shooting, and that was in 2018. That was actually on Valentine's Day. And my cousin Alex and I were best friends. We did pretty much everything together. And yeah, he was 14 years old when he was sitting in his English classroom, and a gunman just walked into the school armed with an AR-15 and just, randomly started shooting people. And my cousin was in the wrong place at the wrong time and just happened to be in the line of fire. And that was literally it. I mean, there was no, they didn't know each other. It was just purely he had hatred in his heart. And he had too easy access to a weapon of war. And so right after that shooting, I did what a lot of families who go through something like that do, which is they start advocating for gun violence prevention laws. And so it's been actually a little over 6 years, if you can believe it, since that shooting. And we have done a lot in those 6 years. We've made a lot of really good progress. We've passed a lot of laws and we've saved people's lives. But as I'm sure all of you know that are listening, it's nowhere near enough. And there's still, around 120 people dying every day due to firearms. And half of those are people committing suicide because, maybe their parents don't store their guns safely or whatever the reason is. There's still so much more work to be done. And so the work that we've done in the 6 years since the shooting has been great, but so much more to go. I want to just tell everyone about this tour and exactly what it is and how it got started. I don't know if you have a specific question for that, but I think it's really important. Oh, sorry. What were you going to say?
I was just going to first say, I'm sorry for your loss, for Alex, for your cousin. And, I was already a mom on February 14th, 2018. That was my moment to get off the sidelines, not because I was affected like you were so deeply, but it was a huge wake up call for me as a parent of 3 small children in this country. So thank you for the work that you do and have done tirelessly since that moment. And your story is one of the reasons I keep going, because I feel so responsible for all of the problems we are saddling your generation with. And, gun violence is one of the most extreme problems, one of the most urgent crises, but there are so many more. It's the climate crises, the mental health crises, attacks on public education. And it should not be on you and your generation to solve all these problems we have saddled you with. But yet here you are doing the work, starting from a very young age, and, your work continues to build. So yes, we cross paths on Twitter, but now because of the Tour to Save Democracy. So please tell us more about the tour, what your goals are, and what's going to happen this summer.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's because I think a lot of young people in this country, and me, I myself are included in that, feel like these issues of climate reform and abortion rights and gun violence prevention being saddled on us. It's on us to kind of take action on those issues. So I'll just give you some background. In 2023, there was a shooting at the Covenant Elementary School in Tennessee. And, that was like 5 or 6, again, little kids being just gunned down, similar to Parkland. And right after that shooting, I guess it was kind of like around the 5-year mark of Parkland. It's been 5 years since Parkland. And I just felt like that we're not doing anywhere near enough. And for some reason, that shooting was a breaking point for me. And I remember we got on a Zoom call with other activists and a lot of my friends. And we were just like, why don't we just sit outside of the Capitol building and not leave until we get some type of movement. Like, I'm so sick of going and lobbying to Republicans and asking them nicely to get on board. There's this story I remember after Uvalde. We met with Ted Cruz in his office in DC, and he looked at a picture of one of the victims in her casket, a little 10-year-old girl, and he just plainly looked back at the mom, zero expression, and he said, "I support putting more cops in schools." You know the story of Parkland. There was 376 cops, law enforcement agencies in that school, and not one of them could stop one single shooter with an AR-15. Anyway, I felt that we needed to do something drastically different after that shooting, so that's exactly what we did. We sat outside the DC Capitol building for a week long, 23 hours a day. We did not leave, and it was really great. It was eye opening. I mean, there was thousands of people who joined us. There were 31 members of Congress from the House and the Senate, and I made it a point to ask every one of them who came up and sat with us, why is this so? Why is this issue so difficult for us? I mean, we have a Democratic majority in the Senate right now. It should be a slam dunk for us. We should be passing bills left and right. We should be showing the American people that Democrats are on the side of fighting for children and fighting for our lives, and Republicans are the ones blocking it. It seems like it should be easy. And it wasn't easy. We still couldn't get any of these bills marked up and passed through the Senate, through Judiciary Committee, for a whole bunch of reasons. But basically, I asked every one of these members of Congress, and they all said, we don't have a big enough Democratic majority. There's maybe one or two Democrats who aren't in support of it. So therefore, our slim one seat majority is not enough, which was horrible to the families there. So right after that sit-in, I did what I thought I could do to best help us get that majority, which is this tour to save democracy idea that I'm on the podcast to talk to you about today. And so simply what it is, it's just me and a bunch of my other Gen Z friends going on a bus tour this summer. And we're stopping in the most vulnerable Republican districts, you call them swing districts, in the country. These are the districts that Republicans won by maybe 500 votes, 1,000 votes, 2,000 votes, really nothing. And these are the seats that we are stopping in to flip them blue, to create a Democratic trifecta majority in Congress that will absolutely prioritize passing, gun violence prevention laws, and codify Roe into law again, and pass climate reform and healthcare and education and all of these things that I know you and a lot of the listeners here understand why that's so important and understand why Democrats are the people to do it. But the problem is a lot of my peers, a lot of the 18 to 29-year-old age group, they don't understand that. And I'll give you an example. Like right after the debate, there's a lot of talk about President Biden and why didn't he talk about abortion rights? And I saw a tweet on Twitter. Actually, no, it was a TikTok by James Charles, who's like this makeup influencer, and he has a huge platform, millions and millions of followers, probably tens of millions. And he said, Joe Biden, why you're the president right now? Why didn't you just pass Roe again? Why didn't you bring it back? And it's laughable. It really is. I mean, that is not how it works. Everyone on this listening to this, I'm sure, knows that that's not how it works. But a lot of other young people know or don't know that you can't just snap your fingers and pass Roe again. You have to have a majority in both houses of Congress. You have to have the president. A lot of other things. So a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there. And so that's why we're doing this tour, to really get out, meet these young voters where they are, and say to them, if you care about any of these issues, abortion rights, climate reform, gun violence prevention, which I know they all do, here's the person running in your district who's going to go to Congress and champion them into law.
I think it's amazing what you're doing, but also how strategic you're being. You're going to places where it is possible to flip these seats. And I think it's important for people to understand, because the news is so doom and gloom, that this is all within reach. There are enough flippable seats up in November that we can get a trifecta if folks show up. So why don't you tell me about a couple of the races you're particularly interested in flipping, or a couple of the candidates that you're excited about that you'll be stopping to visit this summer?
Yeah, so, well, I'll tell you about the first stop on our tour is in a district. It's in Texas 15. This is Michelle Vallejo's district. Again, actually, I'll just run through the stops. The next stop is AZ6, which is Kirsten Engel. Some of the California ones, Dave Min in CA 47, Derek Tran in CA 45, George Whitesides in CA 27. All of these districts that I just mentioned are seats that in 2022 Republicans won them by a very, very slim majority, like a couple thousand votes. So these are seats that are absolutely within range. Very, winning any election is not easy, but if we're going to say on a scale, this would be the easiest ones to win. On the other end of that scale would be Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat, which is not flipping blue in the conceivable future.
Yeah.
So we're not stopping in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, even though we would love to get her out. We're doing these ones, which are easy. I call them low-hanging fruit districts because they're very, very conceivable and possible for Democrats to flip blue. And we picked these because primarily of the midterms in 2022, when we saw the very slim majorities that Republicans won them by actually in 6 of these districts, 6 out of the 20 districts we're going to. President Biden won them in 2020 already. Democrats already have had victories there. These are swing districts. They go back and forth. And with everything on the line, this year in the election, we haven't even spoken about anything democracy wise or what the Supreme Court did yesterday with the immunity of Trump, which is absolutely going to depend on Democrats being in Congress, or else we're going to fall into a dictatorship. That's why we're stomping in these. So we have to refrain our urges from going to, at the time, Kevin McCarthy's district and Marjorie Taylor Greene's district and all these horrible, horrible, villainous Republicans. But instead, we're going to very, very low-hanging fruit, flippable districts.
That's excellent. And I think that's exactly how we wake up on November 6th, not in a dictatorship.
Absolutely.
So thank you for this work. We've touched on, obviously, we've been talking about gun violence prevention. We've touched on some of the other issues, but what are the issues you're going to be talking about? What issues do you feel are going to be the key issues to drive Gen Z to the polls in November?
Yeah, so obviously a big one is gun violence prevention. We've spoken about that. Another huge one is abortion rights. A lot of young people, this was major, major news. I mean, this Roe v. Wade being overturned was very heavily covered in the news. A lot of people, when we're talking about apolitical voters, most of them probably don't know the day-to-day workings of the government. They don't know that Trump is going to trial, and they don't follow like each point that we do so closely. But Roe v. Wade being overturned was a tentpole moment. A lot of young voters knew and do know about that, and they know that it pisses them off. So abortion rights is something that a lot of young people really, really care about. Climate reform is another one of those issues that no matter what young person you talk to, and you say, "Are you worried about the environment?" 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, "Absolutely." I mean, as young people, we've grown up in this Trump era where the only thing we've seen is kind of negative politics, and we are trying to show a different side of that. That there is hope out there. We're trying to motivate young people and say, if you care about these issues, here's what you can actually do about it. I know that after Parkland, the biggest thing for me was I felt like this issue was like staring up at Mount Everest. I didn't have really anyone kind of taking my hand and saying like, no, it's not that bad. This is the path to victory for us. You have to stop in these districts. You have to flip them blue. Here's the bill. Like, I didn't really have any of that. So, and I think for a lot of young people, these issues are very, very like impossible to change. How are we going to do anything about abortion rights? How are we going to do anything about like, what does that even mean? So we're trying to tell people like, this is a candidate running in your district that you live in who is running on taking action on all 3 of those things we talked about. Another huge point for young people is how they're going to get a job and the economy. A lot of my peers are, in college right now. I'm 20 years old. We're looking at entering the job field very, very soon. And for a lot of young people, the economy and getting a job is super, super important. And another thing we're going to be telling young people is that Republicans want to give tax breaks to the upper 1% of billionaires in this country. They're going to make the middle, low income families basically pay more in taxes to make up for that. They want to raise the retirement age. They want to steal your Social Security money, which I know that really isn't something that young people are thinking about, but this has to do with the economy. And we're really going to be telling young people how bad Republicans are in the economy. I mean, every time there's a recession, it's under a Republican. I don't know how many young people know that, but it kind of seems important to me. Those are all things that young people really, really care about. And our theory of change is that they need to be hearing it from another young person.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think another important point is the work that you're doing this summer is going to help drive success at the top of the ticket as well. Because like we were talking about with the debate, there's a lot of dialogue going around about the top of the ticket. But if you get young people engaged in their congressional representative race, I think that's a way to drive turnout in this incredibly important voting bloc, Gen Z, to help the top of the ticket again.
Absolutely. I mean, the way that our founding fathers set up our country was that basically one party can't dominate overall politics, which sometimes it seems like that happens, and the filibuster definitely allows one party to kind of control the narrative. But a lot of what we're doing is telling young people voting for your congressman or your senator is one piece of the puzzle. If we, God forbid, we have Trump reelected, but we have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, that would be a crushing blow. I mean, we would have almost had a Democratic trifecta. And having one House of Congress or two houses of Congress is just a piece of the puzzle. If we don't have the presidency, which in my eyes is the most important part, has the power to veto bills just as soon as they're passed, then there will be no progress being made. So we that's another big part of this for us is saying, yep, we understand that you have reservations about Joe Biden. A lot of us on the bus do too. He's definitely not a perfect candidate. He's definitely flawed in a lot of ways. But we can't make perfect the enemy of good. I think that's the saying.
Yeah.
And Trump is by no stretch of the imagination. I mean, he's so different from Joe Biden. I mean, they are literally at the opposite ends of the spectrum here. I mean, one of them is an old grandpa who stands for democracy, and one of them is an old grandpa who is a vicious dictator. So that's what we're telling young people. As many reservations as you have with Joe Biden, if you want action on any of these bills, and gun violence prevention and abortion rights, and you want to preserve democracy, which is the best system of government ever in the history of humanity, you need to vote for Joe Biden. And if you don't, it's you can kiss all these progressive bills and wishes goodbye. And it's just, yeah. And we're going to be talking about the immunity thing, and we're going to be talking
Good.
about what the Supreme Court does, because it's scary. It's scary as hell for a lot of young people.
Yes, as it should be. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say you don't have to love Joe Biden, but you have to love your country enough to realize what's at stake and show up. And the other thing I've been thinking a lot about since the debate is we're not just voting for Joe Biden, we're voting for the 40,000 people in his administration
That's right.
and the cabinet and all of that. And obviously, Joe Biden is a far superior choice to convicted felon for now and adjudicated rapist
Yeah.
Donald Trump.
I mean, it should be saying he's a rapist found liable for having sexually assaulted somebody should be enough, but it's not. Weirdly,
Right. And especially like you're working so hard on Gen Z. I'm working so hard on white women because white women demographically are the electoral problem and could be the key to really getting this country in the right direction. And yes, the conversation should stop and end at the fact that Donald Trump is an adjudicated rapist, in my
I know it
opinion.
really should. I think there's been 3.5 years of normalization of him being a rapist,
Mhm.
and him inciting an insurrection on our government.
Mhm.
That is crazy. I mean, can we just stop and think about the fact that he tried to overthrow the country? Sometimes I'm like, how is that not enough? How could anybody stand by and say, yeah, that's fine? I mean, whatever. He didn't do it. He wasn't successful. So, like, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. No young person I know is saying that. No young person's going, yeah, it's not a big deal that he tried to overthrow the country. It's just a matter of like they don't believe that change is possible.
Right.
They don't see Joe Biden as somebody who they should be voting for a number of reasons. But when you really compare them, and that's literally what we're doing, we're saying, look at Donald Trump, look at Joe Biden, look at Democrats versus Republicans. I mean, Republicans stand for dictatorship. They want the president to be immune from criminal prosecution. That is the start of a dictatorship. Um, and Democrats don't want that. Democrats want to pass all of these bills that I just spoke about. I don't need to say them again, but that's kind of what we're going for here. I mean, the difference of these two candidates is so different.
Yes. So, I've also seen a lot of chatter about Gen Z sitting this one out, staying on the sidelines, protest votes because they're not happy about what's happening in Palestine. And talk to me about where you are with that and how we avoid that scenario.
The best thing we should do. Listen, people are going to have whatever opinion they're going to have about this issue in the Middle East, and actually, all of their opinions are valid, no matter if you agree or disagree. The worst thing we could do is try to vote shame somebody, or like opinion shame them. Like if you say this to like a pro-Palestinian supporter or somebody who's doing sitting at their college campus, like, you're an idiot, what are you doing, how dare, like, they're going to absolutely never get on your side. They're never going to hear you as somebody who they should be hearing.
Mhm.
So that's what we're not doing. There are people on our tour who are on either end of the spectrum on that issue, who are super pro-Israel, super pro-Palestinian, and all of them agree that electing Democrats and Joe Biden is the number one most important thing. You can have whatever opinion you have on this. The reality is Donald Trump is going to be so much worse on that issue than Joe Biden or Democrats ever will be or could imagine being. I mean, he just said at the debate, why don't we finish him off? Referring to people as a good Palestinian versus a bad Palestinian. What the hell does that mean?
Mhm.
I can't even attempt to reason with it. I don't even think he knows what he's talking about at this point. But a lot of young people, I feel like, they have the right to protest. They have the right to be saying what they want to say. The sit-in that I spoke to you about at the beginning of this podcast was us pressuring Democrats publicly. And it was us trying to get Democrats who we want to elect and we want to see at the finish line, across, to victory. We were saying to them, show the American people that you're on the side of change. And so I understand what a lot of these pro-Palestinian protesters are doing. They're saying we want to vote for you, but I can't because of this reason, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's the worst thing we could do is try to victim or not victim shame, vote shame somebody. But you should absolutely be telling them, by abandoning Democrats, possibly, and by you saying I won't vote for you, you are essentially kind of, you're kind of voting for Donald Trump in a way. And you're saying, I guess the issue of abortion rights and the issue of gun violence prevention and climate reform and all these super important things is not as important, which to us, it is the most important thing. And I think for a lot of people who are not like straight white men, as I am, they don't have the ability to sit back and be like, I'm not going to vote because of this one issue when
Right.
everything else is at stake and our entire system of government, 250 plus years of democracy is on the ballot this year. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people I know don't have that luxury of just saying
Mhm.
I'm sitting out, I'm abstaining, I'm uncommitted, because as much as they might dislike what's happening in the Middle East right now, there's a ton of issues here, and I mean a ton of issues. I mean everything we know.
Mhm.
Possible World War III, where Trump says, "I'll let Putin do whatever the hell he wants."
Mhm.
That is what's on the ballot this year. So, as upset as some people might be about the Middle East, there is absolutely more to the picture. Always, it's never just black and white.
I think what you said before about Gen Z needs to hear this from Gen Z. I just thank you for being such an effective messenger at this critical moment in time. I hope that people feel inspired by hearing your story, what led you to this work, and how dedicated you are to making sure things go well in November. I talk to groups of doctors and medical trainees all the time who think that they're too busy to engage. And what I say to everyone is just dial it up a little bit. Like there's people out here giving 150% like you, and there's people who are giving 0%. And we all need to just find a way to dial it up because on November 6th, we cannot wake up with an ounce of regret.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have to give 150%, but a lot of people have the capacity to give 10, 20, 30%. And that's really all it is. Like giving 10% would mean talking to that crazy family member when you see them who thinks that Obama's running the White House right now and Joe Biden is on adrenochrome and Hillary Clinton was in the basement of the pizza place. That's the person who you need to say that. Like, do you hear what you're saying? Like, no, that's absolutely not true. That's what like giving 10% is, like having those conversations with your family members who are maybe not that far extreme, not
Mhm.
QAnon people. That was an exaggeration, but I think all of us have that family member who goes, I don't, why is voting important? I'm not
Mhm.
going to vote this year. I'm done. Politics is, I'm done. It's crazy. There's no need. Politics is
Mhm.
horrible. Having the conversation of, well, here's what's at stake this year. Did you hear about Project 2025? And do you know what Donald Trump said about immigrants the other day? Did you hear that he wants to do the Hunger Games with immigrants? Do you know that he said that? And I guarantee you they're going to say, oh my God, no.
Mhm.
Um, that's horrible, because everyone with a soul and a heart says
Mhm.
that's insane. So having that conversation. My neighbors are Trump supporters. My neighbors are. I don't know how they've fallen into this, but they are immigrants who don't want to have other immigrants come into the United States. So,
Mhm.
uh, you know, that's a different conversation for me to have with them. But everyone has someone in their life who they can have this conversation with, and you don't need to go out and do a tour like we're doing. That's for the insane people. We'll leave that to us.
That's right. And everybody just needs to do their part. 10%. I like that goal.
Yeah,
At the very least, like for those of us in the bubble, like you and I often are, like have these conversations with people outside the bubble, our non-political friends,
yeah,
people who are just like, oh, but they're just both old. Like,
right. Well, one of them's an old dictator, and one of them's an old, pro democracy champion.
right.
Uh, I like to say, if you can break the echo chamber, you've done something right. A lot of times on Twitter, I feel like I put a tweet out, and when it gets likes, I feel like everyone is just agreeing with me. I don't really feel like my tweets reach people who don't agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're doing this tour, is to reach those people who are, acommitted or uncommitted, or who are apolitical and they don't really understand the stakes yet. So if you can try to break the echo chamber with people in your family who are not on Twitter and they're not following what the SCOTUS laws are, and yeah, that's a job well done.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, how can people listening support the tour?
We have social media handles. On Instagram, we're at Tour to Save Democracy. On Twitter, we're at TT Save Democracy. We have a website, just tourtosavedemocracy.com. You can follow us on all those social media platforms I just mentioned. Stay in the loop. If you go to the link in our bio, you can see how to RSVP for stops near you. I'm sure a lot of you listening will be near our stops. I mean, we're going to pretty much every state. We're not going to Hawaii, obviously, but we're going to Texas, Arizona, California, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, Florida. I mean, we're going to a lot of places. We're going to Nebraska. So try to see if there's a stop near you. We'd love to see you there.
Yes, and their Future Our Vote is proud to be supporting you all in that work. And for those of you who don't want to give 150%, don't want to give up your summer vacation, the least you could do is start following Sam and the tour on social media, donate if you're able, and do your part so they can help us save our democracy.
Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Sam. Thank you for your tireless work, and best of luck to you this summer.
Thank you for your work as well, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks.